I don't know if it was because it was overcrowded with too many ideas that just didn't add up to something incredibly stimulating, or if it was the preponderance of country music blasting at me off of the screen, but I did not have a good time at Twisters. Even though, I have to say, the effects for the film are pretty damn solid. The destruction that tornadoes can cause is compelling to watch and to see visualized by all of the artists that work at these effects companies that help to make blockbuster disaster movies like this. I did love the original Twister with Bill Paxton, rest in peace, and Helen Hunt. And so I went into this movie with some pretty high hopes, and I thought this would be a fun and devastating but emotionally charged and compelling couple of hours at the cinema, and some of that is there. I mean, honestly, when there are tornadoes approaching innocent people and everybody is running for their lives and things are being ripped apart and sucked up into the vacuum and thrown all over the screen, that was compelling. But there's just so much BS that gets in the way. I won't spoil anything here, but basically the movie deals with tornado watchers and tornado wranglers, as some of the people call themselves in this movie, where people are chasing tornadoes, trying to study them, and in the case of Glen Powell's character, he is a YouTuber, I guess just like me, except he runs around after tornadoes. I run around talking about tornado movies. But he's got a posse of other daredevils with him, and they're hooting and hollering and freaking out and blasting that country music and chasing after tornadoes like superstars. And then we've got Daisy Edgar-Jones' character, Kate, who is more of a do-it-yourself scientist who's got this great idea to help her and her colleagues wrangle some tornadoes. Of course, stuff goes wrong, and of course, these different characters with their different viewpoints. One of them is a thrill seeker, one of them is trying to study to try to help people. Of course, everybody is thrown into the mix together, and their stories intertwine, and people are not exactly who they seem to be. And we see some characters face some devastating circumstances, and some of that was pretty well handled. But I have to tell you, there are so many different characters on screen, and I think the biggest problem with it is that these are all tornado experts, and so they're constantly reinforcing. They've got the lingo, they've got all of the terminology, and they're just barking it at each other, and yet they're chasing headlong into tornadoes with different motivations, and it just seems kind of silly. So we just get all of this science barked at us. I don't know if there's some pseudoscience in here as well, but some of it felt a little bit incongruous with the reality of actual superstorms touching down on actual Earth 1 here. There are lots of problems with storms and tornadoes actually happening. There is some science in here that I found a little bit suspect, especially if people are actually facing some of these horrific images in reality. And I guess it doesn't hurt to put a camera and some perspective on the threat that these superstorms have and their increasing volatility, and just the fact that there are more and more of them happening. The movie does do a little bit of that, but everything is so candy-coated and sugar-glossed. I didn't find Glen Powell's character especially charming, and he's squinting and smiling the whole way through, and he's just working it so much. He's like this weird fusion of Matthew McConaughey and Tom Cruise, just smirking, and he's just Joe Cool all the way, and I just didn't believe him. I feel like there's an absence of humility there in this performance. I don't know if he's incapable of that, but this was like a shade of the same type of character that he played in Top Gun Maverick, and I just want to see this guy that's being propositioned as this oncoming superstar to kind of give us a little more flavor than what I saw in this movie. And I haven't seen everything that he's done, but I just was not that impressed. I thought that Daisy Edgar-Jones was pretty good in the role, but I didn't think her role was that well served. She's this traumatized scientist who's trying to grapple with her life and still feel like she can contribute to society, and has all of this latent information to share with people, but also has her own psychological hurdles to overcome. I was actually the most interested in Anthony Ramos's character, who I think is a terrific performer, and he definitely conveys a whole bunch of empathy, and his character actually goes through a lot of interesting twists and turns in this movie, but he's just relegated to kind of background for most of it. You know, we don't really go that deep into who he is and why he is. And I think the movie would have been better served focusing on his journey, especially because he's got all of these interesting skill sets and this moral confliction and all of these hurdles, but he just sort of takes a real backseat to the main performers of Glen Powell and Daisy Edgar-Jones. We also do get to see David Corenswet, who's going to be our new Superman in James Gunn's Superman next year, but he is literally Clark Kented out of this picture. He's got a baseball cap on and not cool-looking goggles for most of it, and he's just sort of sulking and throwing little tantrums, and he's just upset. We don't really get to see him. He's sort of hidden behind the costume and the character, so it's going to be interesting to see how his take on Superman unfolds next year. But as a fan of the character, and I'm very excited to see James Gunn's movie next year, I was pretty psyched that he was in this. We just didn't get any real sense of growth as a performer or anything like that. His character's kind of, again, sort of scrubbed into the background, as are most of Glen Powell's comrades. They have energy, they have excitement, they're doing a lot of yeehaws and, they're screaming about stuff. There are some pretty interesting stunts and some really cool visual effects sequences in here, but I just didn't really connect with these characters nearly enough. I found them to be very condescending to these innocent civilians that they are constantly trying to help throughout this film, who all happen to live in tornado-infused territories, and they just act like they're totally unaware that tornadoes are dangerous and that they need the help of Glen Powell and Daisy Edgar-Jones and all of their allies. It just felt kind of silly and kind of dumb, and it didn't pack that emotional impact, and I sure as hell missed Bill Paxton and Helen Hunt and that cow swirling around. Twister was just a much better movie, much tighter, much more human, and you really cared about everybody. In this movie, I didn't care about anybody. I was just kind of bored and a little bit, honestly, a little bit angry at all the country music I had to listen to. I do like a little country music, but God, there's way too much in this movie. I'm gonna give Twisters a 4.5 out of 10.